In July 2015, Simeon Underwood reviewed Ng Wen Tsai's LSE student file. He found features of the process that reflected the academic habits of the mid-1980s and would have been frowned upon in 2015 but confirmed the validity of Tsai's PhD degree. 4 years later, on June 20, 2019, Marcus Cerny interpreted Underwood's conclusion in 2015 as that there was not an issue of registration being in any way questionable. Mark Thompson, Underwood's successor, who had the overall responsibility of verifying the validity of Tsai's registration and PhD award in 2019, agreed with Underwood. Marcus Cerny, who took Underwood's role dealing with Tsai's missing doctoral thesis in 2019, reviewed Tsai's LSE student file and also agreed with Underwood. This is Tsai's LSE student record, which was disclosed by Tsai's spokespersons on Facebook on September 4, 2019, when Tsai filed a criminal defamation complaint with the Taiwan Taipei District Prosecutor's Office. It instantly flared up an academic firestorm, showing completely different views from those of Underwood, Thompson, and Cerny. The controversy arose from Tsai's registration records and the remarks session. VV and Tsai were first registered as MPhil students at LSE in October 1980. VV was awarded a PhD degree in October 1983, 4 months before a PhD degree was awarded to Tsai in February 1984. VV was registered for 3 sessions, 1980–1981, 1981–1982, and 1982–1983, paid fees for all 3 sessions, and at least one supervisor was assigned for each session. Tsai was awarded her PhD 4 months after VV was, but Tsai was registered only for 2 sessions, 1980–1981 and 1981–1982. She was not registered for 1982–1983, and no fee was paid. No supervisor was assigned for 1982–1983 when Tsai submitted her doctoral thesis for the PhD exam in June and sat her PhD exam in mid-October 1983. In VV's LSE student record, there are 2 entries in the remarks session. The first entry was made on January 25, 1983, showing that VV's registration was transferred to CRS. The second entry was made on June 22, 1983, showing that VV was not re-registered for session 1983–1984 because VV had completed the course. CRS cannot be found in the LSE calendars in the early 1980s. University College London, UCL, is another one of 17 member institutions of the UOL. The information found on the UCL website indicates that CRS stands for Completing Research Status. Basically, a PhD student is eligible to register as CRS when he or she is ready to submit a thesis within 12 months. While on CRS, the PhD student will have continued access to school facilities but will not be required to pay fees. In light of UCL's CRS regulation, on January 25, 1983, VV's registration was transferred to CRS, probably because she was ready to submit the doctoral thesis within 12 months. On June 22, 1983, VV did not re-register for 1983–1984 because VV had completed the course. In the remarks section of Tsai's LSE student record, no entries indicate that Tsai was not registered for 1982–1983 because she had completed the course. Instead, on November 10, 1982, Tsai withdrew from course due to financial difficulties. It was 2 months before Tsai's thesis title was approved, 7 months before Tsai submitted her doctoral thesis for the PhD exam, and 11 months before she sat her Viva exam. According to the LSE official website, a PhD student is allowed to permanently withdraw from a PhD program, and once completed, it cannot be reversed. One email sent from LSE on July 13, 2021, confirmed that SAI's registration at LSE only lasted until June 1982. On September 9, 2019, Wan Lin emailed Minouche Shafiq, LSE director, asking LSE to formally verify whether SAI was correctly awarded a PhD in law in 1984. One of the questions Lin raised was SAI's withdrawal from course on November 10, 1982, noted on SAI's LSE student record. Shafiq never provided an answer to Lin's question. Daniel O'Connor's email on October 3, 2019, reveals that he had advised the director's office not to engage with Lin at all. On September 11, 2019, an academician at the Academia Sinica in Taiwan emailed the law department at LSE, raising the same question. The next day, September 12, 2019, O'Connor's suggested response was to confirm SAI's PhD, but not really engage. On September 23, 2019, Dun Han Chong, one of SAI's spokespersons, responded to the controversy arising from SAI's registration records in the remarks section.
WD from course 的意思是退选，不是退学。我要再讲一次，蔡总统在1982年2月已经完成校方规定的2年在校要求，获得 PhD 的资格，并且回溯至蔡总统1980年10月注册入学的时间，依照 LSE 的相关规定，不需要再进行注册。那大家看到下面的时间，1982年的11月，蔡总统在指导教授跟校方的核准下，退选了相关的课程。你既然已经符合 PhD 的规定，就不需要再注册申请相关的课程。而后续 LSE 也发证明给蔡总统，申请延长在英国学生签证的期间，让蔡总统在能够完成博士论文的撰写。我相信很多有留学经验的朋友都知道，很多留学生在国外生活物价比较昂贵，很多人也是用相关的方式来完成他们的学位的论文的撰写。
In November 2020, the Taipei Representative Office in the UK presented 10 questions to Kevin Haynes. Chang's vague 2-year requirement became Question 2. What were the minimum registration requirements for a person enrolling in the University of London's PhD program between 1980 and 1985? Instead of a direct answer, Haynes pointed to the sessions subheaded General Regulations and Qualifications for Admission in the LSE calendars for 1980-1981, 1981-1982, and 1982-1983. According to the 1980-1981 LSE calendar, every student was required to pursue a regular course of study, and the course of study for the PhD degree would extend over not less than 2 academic years for a full-time student. VV and SAI were first registered as MPhil students at LSE in October 1980. The course length was 21 months, and the expected completion date was June 1982. 21 months were 2 academic years, from October 1980 to June 1982. VV's registration was transferred from MPhil to PhD on October 18, 1982. The notification letter issued by Ian Stevenson, secretary of the LSE Graduate School, clearly stated that VV's minimum course as a full-time student was 2 academic years starting from October 1980. SAI's registration was transferred from MPhil to PhD on February 11, 1982. The notification letter stated that SAI's minimum course as a full-time student would be 2 academic years from October 1980. Question 3 presented to Haynes in November 2020 was, Did Ms. Tsai Ing-wen transfer to a PhD program from an MPhil program? If so, what would that conversion process have entailed? Relying on the same registration transfer notification letter, Haynes stated that the typed note also confirmed that her registration as a PhD candidate would be backdated to October 1980 and that the minimum period of registration for an full-time PhD student was 2 academic years. Haynes provided his answer, changing the clearly stated minimum course as a full-time student was 2 academic years into the minimum period of registration for a full-time PhD student was 2 academic years. The answer supported Chang's assertion and was sent to the Taipei Representative Office in the UK on December 18, 2020, and ultimately reached the Taiwan Taipei District Court. The 1983–1984 UOL regulations provided that after completing an approved course of study, a student would normally be required to present himself for examination within 1 calendar year. The 1980–1981 LSE calendar provided that the thesis may be submitted on or after the first day of the month following that in which the prescribed course is completed. In view of the above regulations, the minimum length of the PhD programs at LSE in the early 1980s was 2 academic years of course of study plus the time required for PhD examination. VV was an overachiever who was registered in October 1980, completed the course of study in June 1982, and was awarded a PhD in October 1983. It was 2 academic years of course of study plus 16 months for the PhD exam, 37 months in total. Registration goes hand in hand with fees. According to the 1982–1983 LSE calendar, students were normally expected to pay fees by the session, and fees were due to be paid not later than the end of the first week of the Michaelmas term. Nowhere in the calendar did it state that fees were not required after completing 2 academic years of course of study. Furthermore, a PhD student would be allowed to pay a continuation fee if 1. He had completed the approved course of study, 2. Had been permitted to continue the registration and 3. Had been registered for MPhil or PhD full-time for 3 years. The continuation fee entitled PhD students to receive advice from supervising teachers and to attend 1 seminar but not to attend any lecture courses. Therefore, there was no minimum registration requirement in the early 1980s. PhD students were required to be registered all the time. The difference was the required fee, a sessional fee for the first 3 years, or a continuation fee thereafter if continued registration was permitted. LSE was quite serious about collecting the fees in the early 1980s. If fees were not paid when due, registration was incomplete and the student was not entitled to use any of the school's facilities unless an extension is allowed in writing. LSE had the right to withhold or to ask the University of London to withhold the award of a degree to any student owing fees. VV had a scholarship for graduate study at LSE, and 3 sessional fees had been paid on VV's behalf for 1980–1981. 1981–1982 and 1982–1983. To be re-registered for session 1981–1982, VV had to inform the secretary of the LSE Graduate School that she wished to re-register. Submitted a completed report form showing her research work in 1980–1981 and signed by her supervisor. And a completed re-registration form for session 1981–1982. VV wished to re-register for session 1982–1983. Again, she submitted a completed report form showing her research work in 1981–1982. And a completed re-registration form for session 1982–1983. The design of the continuation fee was similar to the Completing Research Status (CRS) provided by UCL and noted in the remarks section of VV's LSE student record. On January 25, 1983, VV's registration was transferred to CRS, indicating that her thesis would be ready within 12 months. On June 14, 1983, VV was reminded by the graduate school that the report form and request for re-registration for 1983–1984 session should be completed by June 6, 1983. VV then informed the graduate school that she did not wish to re-register for the 1983–1984 session. These documents found in the VV file are consistent with the registration records noted in VV's LSE student record and the remarks section. The fees charged by LSE in the early 1980s were composition fees that covered registration, teaching, first entry to examinations, the use of the library, and membership of the Students' Union. VV planned to submit her thesis in July 1983. On October 5, 1983, the academic registrar at UOL notified VV about VV's successful PhD exam. VV's PhD exam was most likely held between mid-August and mid-September of 1983. Based on the LSE fees regulations, the sessional fee VV paid for 1982–1983 covered the first entry to the PhD exam held before October 5, 1983. If VV failed in her first entry to the examination, she needed to secure permission to continue registration and pay the continuation fee in order to continue her pursuit of a PhD degree. According to SAI's LSE student record, SAI paid the sessional fee for 1980–1981, which was £2,000 for overseas students. For 1981–1982, the sessional fee for overseas students was £2,500. Either £300 or £800 were waived, and the Henry Luce Foundation in New York paid £550 on SAI's behalf. SAI was not registered for 1982–1983 and withdrew from course on November 10, 1982. She did not pay the sessional fee, which was £2,700 for overseas students, and the scholarship of £500 from the Henry Luce Foundation was cancelled. Dun Han Chong, SAI's spokesperson, argued that SAI terminated her registration early in order to save money. The truth is all PhD students were required to pay sessional fees only for 3 sessions. The continuation fee required after 3 sessions was a flat fee. For 1983–1984, it was only £150 for home students as well as overseas students. The regulations about the continuation fee confirm that receiving advice from supervising teachers was not free. In addition, SAI did not pay the sessional fee for 1982–1983. As a result, her first entry to the PhD exam in mid-October 1983 was not covered. Haynes' answer to question 2 confirmed that SAI ended her registration early due to a lack of funds but argued that SAI was allowed to complete her thesis with advice from her supervisor, Michael John Elliott, submitted her thesis in June 1983, sat her viva in October 1983, and received notification award in February 1984. According to Haynes, it was not uncommon at the time of SAI's period of study for PhD candidates in UK universities to complete their thesis independently, and be permitted to enter for examination. To find out whether Haynes' answer to question 2 is true, on May 15, 2023, FOIA requests were submitted to the top 10 UK universities, except LSE. Asking each university's regulations in the early 1980s about minimum registration requirements and fees for PhD students, including exceptions, for example, permitting a PhD student to terminate registration early due to financial difficulties but continue to receive advice from supervisor, complete the doctoral thesis independently, be permitted to enter for examination and be awarded a PhD degree without being registered. UCL is one of the 17 member institutions of UOL. In response to the FOIA request, it provided UOL's school regulations. Imperial College London refused the FOIA request as vexatious. On June 8, 2023, the University of St Andrews responded to the FOIA request. Based on the papers held in the university collections relating to the awards of PhDs from January 1982 to June 1984, it found no instance of a non-registered student being awarded a degree. In the early 1980s, the University of Bath required all students to register at the beginning of each academic year. Only those who have registered should have the rights and privileges of students and members of the university. The University of Durham required all postgraduate students who had completed course requirements but who still had to complete examination requirements to pay an annual continuation fee in order to maintain registration. It indicates that, similar to LSE, registration must be maintained in order to take the PhD exam at Durham in the early 1980s. The University of Warwick charged annual fees in the early 1980s, which covered the charges for registration, tuition, examination, but not re-examination, and graduation. It indicates that nothing was free, even for graduation, at Warwick in the early 1980s. On June 21, 2023, Loughborough responded to the FOIA request. The university did not hold information on any exceptions which might have been made for individuals. However, it was incredibly unlikely that any exceptions could have been made where a researcher was examined whilst not registered as a student with the university. On June 12, 2023, the University of Oxford refused the request with respect to any exceptions made to registration requirements and examination because if there had been any exceptions, it had to go through Oxford's General Board of the Faculties, the individual faculty boards, and/or the sub-faculty boards. The estimated time for retrieving the records would exceed 18 hours, the maximum amount of time a public authority was required to spend on a single request. Oxford's response proves that it was extremely uncommon at the time of SI's period of study for PhD candidates at Oxford to complete their thesis independently, and be permitted to enter for examination without being registered. Similar to Oxford, at the University of Cambridge, to reduce or remit fees for graduate students in the early 1980s, it had to go through the Board of Graduate Studies. The responses of 7 top 10 UK universities prove Kevin Haynes' answer to question 2 is untrue.